survive in America? Who will survive in America? Who will survive in America? Who will survive in America?
No justice, no peace. Prosecute police. No justice, no peace. Prosecute police. No justice. Prosecute police. No justice. Prosecute police. No justice.
On the state versus Robert Olsen.
Your Honor, Mr. Olsen is present. We waive full reading of the indictment. Plead not guilty to all counts of the indictment. Request 10 days for motion.
Okay, Brandon, thank you.
The verdict is in as a former DeKalb County police officer on trial for killing an Air Force veteran in DeKalb County.
On count 1, felony murder, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. On count 2, felony murder, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
Robert Olsen wept in court as the jury found him not guilty on 2 counts of murder, but he was convicted of aggravated assault, violation of oath by a public officer, and making false statements.
Olsen could now be released on bond as he waits to be sentenced. He was fired from his job after he shot and killed Anthony Hill while responding to the call of a naked man acting strangely in an apartment complex in 2015. Olsen told investigators he was in search and fear of his life when he shot Hill as Hill ran at him. Prosecutors argued Hill was suffering from PTSD and was unarmed, and that Olsen had other options to stop him.
Lies after lies after lies that make his story not credible. And that's why it was easier for me to make my decision, but I had to convince people otherwise that, the guilty should stay.
So you're saying that there were people who believed that Robert Olsen
should walk.
I'm sad to tell you, unfortunately, Anthony Hill won't be the only one if you don't make a demand a change. Yes, sir. Anthony Hill won't be the only one if you don't demand a change. The power is in your hand. The power is in your hand. And I'm tired of hearing these stories.
Yes. Way too many videos of problems. But you're not black. Remember, we only kill black people. Yeah, we only kill black people, right? All the videos you've seen, have you seen any white people get killed? You have.
I don't know what's in his heart, but I certainly know what came out of his mouth.
So the next time a police officer, the news media, a politician says this is not a problem in Atlanta, you tell them they're wrong. Justice is the maximum sentence. That would send a message to law enforcement in this state as well as around the country that we're not going to stand for the shooting of unarmed African American men or women, particularly unarmed veterans who are in mental health crisis.
As a trained officer, if you pull out your gun, you shouldn't have to pull out your gun unless it's posing a threat. A nude man is not a threat. So, like I said, he should have used a good old fist if you have to, And when I was trying to let them understand that when you see a firefighter, you expect a firefighter to go in a burning building and rescue. You're not expecting a firefighter to say, "I'm not going in there. That's not my job to go in there." You're not expecting a firefighter. So when we call a cop, we're expecting a cop to de-escalate a situation, not turn to the most deadliest arsenal you have on your belt. And that's where he went wrong. And that's where I had to come in to make sure that the others see that that's where he did.
The biggest difference that the defendant has between when this trial started and now is he is now a convicted felon. He is a convicted felon of aggravated assault. He is a convicted felon of violation of oath by public officer twice, and violation of found guilty of making a false statement. This jury has found that he was responsible for the death by finding him guilty of the crimes that led to Mr. Hill's death. And not only that, but more importantly, lied about it. He lied to cover up what he had done.
We are calling for justice from the newly appointed Judge Letitia Dear Jackson. We're calling on justice from the district attorney.
I know that Anthony didn't die in vain, and he will be proud of the work that we are doing today.
We believe that this defendant would be a flight risk if allowed to be out on bond, he is now a convicted felon and is facing upwards of 35 years in prison. That is a very big difference than when he walked into this courtroom. And given the fact that the family has been waiting a very long time for justice in this case, to have to wait longer for justice in this case in the state's position does not seem appropriate. And we believe that this individual should be treated, as I said before, as every other defendant who comes into this courthouse, and that when a person is found guilty of aggravated assault and the related crimes as charged in this indictment that led to the death of Anthony Hill, who was doing absolutely nothing wrong on that day, was committing no crime. Because let's remember, while they didn't find him guilty of felony murder, they found him responsible for shooting a gun that led to Anthony Hill's death. And justification was an absolute defense to the aggravated assault. They still found him guilty of it.
Who will survive in America? Who will survive in America? Who will survive in America? Who will survive in America?
Do you know Anthony Hill?
Yes.
Is Anthony Hill your son?
Yes.
When was Anthony born?
He was born June 15th, 1988.
This is the other big thing, right? The other big thing they keep banging on is strong. All the things the defendant didn't know. He didn't know Anthony was a great guy. Now they admit he was. He didn't know he was a former Air Force vet. He didn't know that he was working on music. He didn't know he had a family. He didn't know all these things, right? Why are they saying that? What does that matter? If he had known all that, would he have not shot him? Because he's saying he shot him based on his actions, right? Not on his background. I mean, stop and think about that circular argument. What does that matter? He didn't know it. He didn't know it. His actions would still be the same. What they're trying to do is strip Anthony Hill out of this trial. He didn't know any of that, so let's not talk about it. Well, I'm not going to let him do that, neither should you. What he did know is from the radio, young black male, unarmed, naked, mental health problems. So, what they want you to say is, well, he didn't know any of that stuff, so don't hold that against him. It makes it way, way worse. Because think about it. If you do an action without knowledge, what have you done? You've made some what? Some assumptions, right? You shot someone based on assumptions. Now let's think about it. He can see Anthony Hill. He's got the information he's got. What was it about him that allowed Robert Olsen to assume the absolute worst of Anthony Hill? What was it? Yeah, I'm going to go back there and talk about that. What was it? To allow him to assume, to speculate something so bad that he took that man from his family, that he killed him. What was it? Don't say it was because he was naked. Don't say it. Because you were never more vulnerable than then. You could not hurt somebody more easily than when they are naked. There's no defense that you have. So don't say that. What was it about him? Y'all go back there and talk about that. What allowed him to think that? You're going to have to go back there and talk about some stigmas. The defense brought it up in their closing, right? Said you can have all these thoughts, but don't let it cloud your judgment. Okay, you need to judge this case based just on the facts, all right, and the evidence. That is right. But to act like these things don't exist is ridiculous. The defense has been riding these stigmas all trial. Mental health, that's got to equal dangerous. Maybe back in like 1955, but this is 2019. That is not true. That's offensive. You could be mentally ill and not be dangerous, not deserve to be shot, not deserve to be called the suspect or the perpetrator. Y'all need to go back and talk about that. Y'all also need to ask you this. You need to go and talk about whether or not this would have happened in any other community. You put this in an affluent suburb. Does it happen? And I know this is the South and we're supposed to be polite and there's things sometimes we just don't talk about in mixed company, right? Back in that room, y'all need to talk about all this. Because if your answer is no, it wouldn't have happened. Not somewhere else. Maybe in Heights, she can't believe it. You know, maybe not up in an affluent suburb. That tells you this is what? Unreasonable. Because justice is the same everywhere. No matter where you live, no matter who you are. They keep getting up and saying, he's not a murderer, he's not a murderer. Mr. Johnson is right. There's not first degree or second degree murder in Georgia. You don't have any of that. You've got malice murder, which he's not charged with, and you've got felony murder. We charged him with exactly what he did. The minute he took his gun out, he went beyond the use of force policy. He took his gun out when somebody's 80 feet away. The minute he did that, he violated the use of force policy. And when he pulled the trigger, he committed an aggravated assault because he was beyond the law at that point. This is not a complex case, let me tell you right now. This is not complex. He broke the law when he violated those policies and when he pointed his gun at Anthony Hill instead of using something less. And when he pulled the trigger, he shot him. That's an aggravated assault. Did someone die during the course of that aggravated assault? Yes, that's felony murder. Doesn't mean he said, oh, I'm going to kill him. Doesn't mean he was angry. Doesn't mean he premeditated it. It means he did the act and it caused the death. It resulted in the death. Just like violating his oath. If he doesn't violate his oath, we're not here. But by not going by his training, by ignoring, and I'm not even going to go through them all again, the litany of things he was trained to do and should have done, he violated his oath. Did someone die? Yes, that's a felony. This is not a complex issue. They can try to lawyer it up all day long. It's not. That's as simple as it gets. We charged him with what he did, and he didn't have to wake up and say, oh man, I'm going to totally violate the policy and the use of force policy today. That's not the law. You have to intend to do the act. Did he intend to pull the trigger? Yes, we know that. Nobody made him pull the trigger. He didn't slip. There's no defense of accident. He intentionally pulled the trigger. That's the intent. He willfully did it. Nobody made him do it. So don't let the offense get it twisted. That's the law. And no one's above that law. And Anthony Hill damn sure isn't below it. They want to pull apart parts of what Sergeant Walker told you, right? Well, Sergeant Walker said, you know, and they had some things on their slide. He said, they forget about all this. And I don't know how they can. Sergeant Walker completely told you he violated his oath. He didn't follow his training. This was way beyond the use of force policy. You took an oath as a jury to render a verdict based on the evidence you heard in court. That's what you heard. Uncontradicted. That's what you have to base your verdict on. I'm not going to go through them all again, except the soft hands and hard hands. He went through all of that. And remember the demonstration he did with Mr. Johnson, where he showed you basically, and this is how this should have played out, right? Somebody stumbling towards you like that, and that's what he was doing, stumbling and at the end walking. Push him to the side, maybe draw your asp, right? At that point, you could draw your asp, you could draw your taser, you probably wouldn't have to do any of it, right? Because he hasn't hurt anybody. We'll never know because he killed him. But that demonstration is what should have happened, and then nobody's here. I watched you all watch that. I watched the recognition. Yeah, okay, that's pretty reasonable. That's why the use of force policy exists, to instruct officers. That's why they do all that training. That's the exact man, by the way, who was sitting in that chair, who trained him. Think about that. Let that sink in for a second. That's the guy who trained him. He's telling you, yeah, this is not at all what we told him to do. This is way beyond the use of force policy. That's a violation of the law, and it has to be reckoned with. It can't just be brushed away. They gave him all the training and all the tools he needed. Again, this is not a DKPD problem or a dispatch problem. This is a Robert Olsen problem. The defense wants you to put blame anywhere else but their client, and that's not right. You should be looking exactly in that direction. He's the one that made the choice to pull his weapon. And it's not self-defense. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not. But even if, let's say you go back there and you say, I don't know, I think it's self-defense. I'm saying that's a pretty giant hurdle. But let's say you're gullible or I don't know, something's going on and you maybe didn't see all the evidence and you say, okay, it's self-defense. Okay. It's still a crime. How do they get around this? How is that not excessive? To kill an unarmed naked man who's 6 feet from you, according to the defendant. It can't be okay. That has to be reckoned with. It has to be answered.
Robert Olsen was convicted of aggravated assault, which is the shooting of Anthony Hill. Robert Olsen was convicted of lying about shooting Anthony Hill, and Robert Olsen was convicted of violating his oath of office. He is a convicted felon. And convicted felons in DeKalb County generally are sentenced the same day.
Amen. Right. Yes, sir.
They are not granted appeal bonds and allowed to go home. So I think what the activists are saying, and I know what our civil rights organizations are saying, and I know what the oldest civil rights organization is saying, and that's this. On November the 1st, there should be a sentence of prison time.
Amen.
That's right.
35 years.
We believe that this defendant would be a flight risk if allowed to be out on bond. He is now a convicted felon and is facing upwards of 35 years in prison.
This is not Dallas. It's not Fort Worth. This is Atlanta, Georgia, DeKalb County to be precise. One of the darkest counties in Georgia. I love how we talk about people of color, and I love my people of color, but today we're talking about black folks. We had an unarmed black man that was gunned down in Chamblee, Georgia.
Murder!
Somebody that served this country, fought on foreign lands, and then came home to be shot in cold blood by a public servant.
Disrespected.
So again, we sat out here for 12 days, 6 days waiting for a verdict. We got to speak to the jurors, and we respectfully disagree with the first 2 counts verdict. But with regard to the other 4, we are expecting a sentence that sends a message.
Maximum.
And that message is clear. In DeKalb County, when you murder an unarmed citizen, that's naked, that's not a threat, you get the max.
That's right.
I want to thank our elected district attorney for having the courage and the temerity to charge him with murder. I hear a lot of conversation in the press about, oh, it should have been a manslaughter charge. No, this man was unarmed, naked, and his last words were, oh, the police are my friends, they will help me. That was his last words, and those words should haunt you. They should haunt every citizen of DeKalb County. And what I'm asking for on behalf of the association is this. On November the 1st at 9 o'clock, I want all of DeKalb County at this courthouse sending a message. Because not only are we the citizens, but we're voters. And we're watching this trial. There have been people who stood out all night for an indictment. There have been people who were here every single day of the trial, outside and inside. There was a family that drove from Moncks Corner, South Carolina, expecting justice. And so on November the 1st, in the words of a great jurist that happens to be in this building, this is a court of law, not a court of mercy.
3 years ago, we started a coalition of just people who were upset. We were frustrated and tired. So we decided to call ourselves Us Protecting Us. And we just have 3 demands that we would like to make to DeKalb County. And they're so simple. Number 1, we would like a triage system of 911 operators to identify cross-disability emergencies. We would like them to ask the correct questions in order to identify the problem, so the call can be directed to a mobile crisis unit, not the police. The City of Chicago implemented this training and identified more than 5 times more mental health crisis calls than in previous years. People were less afraid to ask for help. We would like to see changes with the current crisis intervention training in which Officer Olsen received. We believe this training should be peer-led by people in the community and people with cross disabilities. This will provide a real and true understanding of what their experience is versus critical classroom knowledge. And finally, we would like a mobile crisis unit that will send out emergency responders, but not law enforcement. No matter how much training an officer has, they will always have their weapons at their will. A DeKalb mobile crisis unit is in effect now. It's severely underfunded, and I'm sure most of you don't even know that one exists. With the correct training, volunteers, and peer-led communication and community-led communication, we believe that these three small things could make a huge change.